One of the things that I really enjoy is having people around for a meal, having people around in our home, round the table, sharing food together. Both Mary and I come from large families, and we just love those times when a family can come together, often around the table and sharing food. And it's something that we've not been able to do for quite a while now. And probably on my list of things I would like to do as soon as we're able to is to begin those kind of things again, having a meal together with people and a chance to talk. You know, over the years that we've been married, we've had all sorts of traditions that we might celebrate different things within our family group in different places. It might be that with some relatives at Christmas we'll be in our home and everyone will come and the table will be full and there'll be maybe 17, 18 people there. Maybe another time of the year we'll go to someone else's home. And at Easter, the tradition was always to go to one of Mary's brothers' homes. And there might be an Easter egg hunt when the children were very young and they would hide all the eggs in the garden. And as they got older, we'd realise that they're too old now to be chasing Easter eggs. But we built these traditions, these things we would do together at certain times. And people got invited into that. Things changed over the years. Other children were born and they became part of this tradition. And then as everyone got older, it might be that there was boyfriends and girlfriends and husbands and wives, and they all became part of this growing family. Great nieces, great nephews. And we'd all get together and we'd tell stories. There'll often be times to laugh, times to tell stories, times to remember. There'll be something funny that somebody had said or something funny someone had done. And those things would get talked about and remembered. And then there'd be the new stories. As new people got added, there would be their stories that would get added as well, as we got to know these new people built into this family. There'd be times we'd be celebrating together, times we'd be encouraging each other, maybe times we were supporting each other, sometimes when we were just grieving together at other times, but all wrapped up, these family stories told around a table. Things that just linked our lives as we talked about these lived out stories. There were times to look back and remember and times to look forward. Even now, just this recently, we've been looking back and remembering a year since this country's been in lockdown. Most areas have got websites now where they're saying, come and tell us your stories. What are stories that you want to remember? What have been some highlights, some high moments in that? What have been some low times as we look back and remember? And you know, Easter is really about retelling a story. And over the next few days, we're going to be looking at just that, the story of Easter, capturing this story that's right at the heart, that the story that's really on the last week of Jesus' life here on earth. And yet in that week, in this story is captured everything about Jesus' life, who he was, what he came to do, and how that affects me, how I become part of that story. We come to see a visible show, a demonstration of God's love for humanity, his love for you and for me. And part of that story I want to talk about today is set around a table, a group of people having a meal together. Jesus meets with his closest friends, the 12 disciples. And we can read it, if you've got a Bible, in Luke chapter 14. And maybe you want to just read this with me. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb. And Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go and make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" And so he sent 2 disciples and he told them, "Go into the city, and a man will be carrying a jar of water. He'll meet you. Follow him and say to the owner of the house that he enters, 'The teacher asks, where is the room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And he'll show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready, and make preparations for us there." And so the disciples left, and they went into the city, and they found things just as Jesus had told them. And so they prepared the Passover. And when the evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12 disciples. And while they were reclining at the table, eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one of those who is eating here with me." And they were saddened, and one said, "Surely you don't mean me." And Jesus said, it is one of the 12, one who dips his bread into the bowl with me. The Son of Man will go as it is written, but woe to the one who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better if he had not been born. And then while Jesus was eating, he took bread. And when he had given thanks, he broke it and he gave it to his disciples. And he said, take it. This is my body. And then he took a cup. And when he had given thanks, he gave it to them. And they all drank from it. And he said, this is the blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I tell you, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God. You know, this story is often called the Last Supper. It's the last time before his death that Jesus sits down for a meal with his closest followers. And over centuries, over years, artists have depicted it. There will be pictures that have been painted that capture this moment of Jesus surrounded by his 12 disciples, sitting at a low table and enjoying a meal together. The meal itself that they would have been sharing would have been the traditional Jewish Passover meal. They'd have gone and prepared for it. It was a meal that told a story. Every element on the table would represent something in a story of God bringing freedom to his people. The Israelites had been slaves in Egypt, and God had sent a word through Moses to Pharaoh to say, let them go. And then through a number of shows of his power, it had come to a point where he'd let them go. And this is the story that was being told in this meal. And so on the table would be a number of items. There would be bread. It was unleavened bread. It was bread that hadn't had yeast added to it. It hadn't risen. And it was to represent the fact that the children of Israel had left Egypt in a rush. There hadn't been time for the bread to rise. They remembered that. There would be a plant root, a bitter tasting thing, probably horseradish. It would remind them that life had been really hard in Egypt as they had been slaves. There'd be another bowl on the table which would have a mixture of nuts and fruit mixed together to represent mortar. It was to remind them that as slaves there would have been this hard labour, making bricks, working for the Egyptians. There would be parsley on the table, which would often be dipped in salt water and eaten. Parsley was to represent hope. Something new was happening, but there'd been tears shed as they'd been slaves. There would be a lamb bone. It would represent a lamb that had been sacrificed. At the point that's called the Passover, when a plague had come on Egypt and all the firstborn would die, and Moses had been told to kill a lamb and take its blood and put it on the doorposts of the homes, and that when death would come across these homes and the firstborn of Egypt would die, these children would be saved, and they would remind themselves of that and tell that story again. There might be an egg as part of the things on the table to represent mourning, but also new life. And there would be wine, cups of wine. Some of them would be spilt at different points in the meal as they remembered the different plagues that had inflicted Egypt. But they'd also drink wine to represent freedom that had come to the people. And there would be one cup that would be left for Elijah, who the Jewish people at the time would believe would come and summon the arrival of a Messiah. And so in this table of all these items are a story that was being told that God had brought freedom to his people. He'd brought release from things that had enslaved them and captured them. He'd brought protection from them. There'd been hope, moments of something to look forward to, even though at that time there might have been tears. It was a story that was being told through this meal. And as they're having this meal together, as Jesus is there with his followers and they're telling this story, he takes this old story, this traditional story, and he begins to add something new into it, something that may have been unexpected to his disciples. He takes a piece of bread and he breaks it and he hands it to them and he invites them to eat it, and he says, this is my body broken for you. And he takes a cup and he gives thanks and he invites them to drink it. And he says, this is my blood poured out for many. In the middle of this meal, this traditional meal, remembering and telling a story of what God had done for his people, he places himself. He reveals who he is. That not only has God done that in the past, but right now, God is doing it again through Jesus. He is going to bring complete freedom for people. Into the story, he includes his disciples. He shares it with them and he says, come and be part of this. Take this, eat this, take this, drink this. He doesn't just take this old story and include himself into it, but he includes and he invites his disciples into this storytelling too. This is for you. Come and be part of the story of what God is doing. He hasn't just done it in the past, but he is doing it right now, bringing freedom, bringing salvation, bringing back a relationship to God. And then into that story, he includes you and me. He's not talking about something that has happened for people long ago. He's not saying, I'm doing it for you, my followers. He says, I've come to do this for the many, for all who will come to believe and to know. And somehow we're included into that moment now. It's why in churches today we do what we might call communion. We tell the story again. And if you're listening to this and church and faith is something that is new to you, if hearing about Jesus is something that's been a new thing, it may be that you've heard about communion. You may have even taken communion, maybe at a school. Maybe you've been to a wedding where there might have been communion. Maybe you've been to a christening where there may have been communion and you've always wondered, well, what was its origin? Where did it come from? It comes from this point here, these two things that were on a table that Jesus took and gave such incredible significance to. He was saying, I'm coming as a sacrifice for you so that you can know God. You know, bread and wine would have been familiar things. They're here on the table in this meal, but they would have been on a table for most meals that you would have had in those days. And if you can cast your mind back to when we used to go to restaurants, maybe over a year ago, when it was possible to go to a restaurant, you'll often be given a basket of bread at the start of a meal and you'll be offered something to drink. There would be drink and there would be bread on a table. I don't think that when Jesus was doing this at that time, he was thinking this is just a story that we'll make into a ritual and it will take place at a church with a few people on a Sunday every now and again. I think he wanted people to know there's something in this story I want you to tell that is going to impact every part of your life. I think he wanted people to know that there'd be something about retelling the story again and again that was important. And so the two things he used would be the common things that you will often see on a table. I wonder what that looks like in our homes today. Every time we might see bread and wine, when there's something to eat and something to drink, and we think, let's tell that story of what Jesus did. Let's remind ourselves again and again and again. You know, in the early church, you can read in Acts 2, and it says they met up every day. They shared meals in each other's homes. They broke bread. I think there's something about that early church that was continually telling this story. Do you remember what Jesus said? Do you remember what he said he's done for me? There would be something that was a daily remembrance of it. Lord, I don't want it just to be something we think about at Easter, that we remember that last week in your life, remember that you died for me. I want it to be a daily memory for me, Lord, what you have done for me, how it impacts every part of my life. What if every time I sat at a meal table and saw something to eat and something to drink, I could be reminded, Lord, you've done this for me. I am part of this story. I think there's a real power in us retelling stories, reminding ourselves of what Jesus has done for us, but also being invited into the story, realizing that you did it for me. You know, in this passage we read that they had to go and prepare this space where they were going to celebrate this meal, where they were going to tell this story. And the disciples say to Jesus, where is it you want us to go? And he gives them these clear instructions. And then this incredible journey as they go and do what Jesus said, they find here is the place that they can prepare. There's a lot of verses in the Bible that talk about God preparing things, that Jesus preparing places for us. You know, there's a wonderful scripture which says that Jesus says to his disciples, I'm going to prepare a place for you. I'm going to make it possible for you to really know God. And way before Jesus arrived, before his birth on earth, the prophet Isaiah talked about things that would happen, about Jesus coming. And there's a passage, it's almost like an invitation that is in Isaiah 55. And if you think about this in the context of a table, it says this, all who are thirsty come to the water. All who are penniless, come anyway, come and eat. Come, buy drinks, buy wine and milk, but without money, everything's free. Why would you spend your money on something that's like junk food? Why would you waste your hard-earned cash? Listen to me and listen well. Eat only the best. Fill yourself with only the finest. There's a picture of a table of food being prepared, and we are being invited to come. And who's invited? Well, Jesus has said, I've come for the many. It's for all of us. And I wonder where you feel right now in your own life. Maybe you feel that you could do with some refreshing. Maybe thirsty is a word that makes you think, yeah, I feel a bit thirsty. I just feel a need of refreshing. You know, when Mary and I got married, we spent the day before our wedding making these name cards that would go on the table at our reception as people would be invited in and have a meal together. And we considered wherever each person would sit, who would sit with who on which tables that they might have the most fun. And I'll let you into a slight secret. There was one table we weren't really sure where to put some people, so we just put them together on a table. And I think perhaps the most laughter came from that table. But we invited people and we seated them. Jesus invites us to a table. This Easter, imagine that you are sitting at a table and he offers, this is what I've done for you. My body is broken for you. My blood has been shed for you, that you can know a relationship with God. I think there's something very special in Psalm 23. It's written way before this time, but it's as if David had some glimpse of what was happening here. And he uses a phrase in that and says this, you have prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You know, as Jesus sat down to have that celebration, to tell the story of God's goodness, he said, there's someone sitting around the table with me who's going to dip bread into the same bowl as me, who is then going to betray me. And Jesus knew that was God's plan, that was God's purposes, that was going to happen, that had to happen. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely I can be sure of this. There's confidence that your goodness and your love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in your house forever. The verse starts by saying, the Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. We come if we have needs. He makes us lie down in green pastures. He leads us beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. If you are thirsty, come. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. And even though there are times that I might experience darkness, like walking through a dark valley, I know I can fear no evil because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table. There's an old story of what God did to deliver his people from Egypt. There's a story of what Jesus told of what he's come to do, that we are included in. And it's a story that goes forward in the ages to come, in order that in the coming ages, he might show the riches of his grace, expressed in his kindness to us in Christ Jesus. I want to pray that just as you spend this time this Easter reflecting, telling this story, that you might accept this invitation where Jesus comes and says, would you sit with me? I'm inviting you into my presence because of what I have done. Maybe this is going to be an Easter for you when you receive this gift for you for the very first time. God bless you.